This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. Really excited to have you this week. Thank you for joining us yet again and giving us your time, which we know is very valuable. On this episode today with me, joining is Nikolai Avolodkin and Marcus Merrill. Hey, guys. Welcome back to the podcast.
Always great, Jason. Yes, sir.
It's tough. Should I continue to introduce you, or do we just assume you're going to be here at this point?
No, it's a rotating panel. I think we should.
It is rotating. Yeah, we rotate enough.
You should continue to introduce us and keep telling us our credentials so we feel good about ourselves.
Oh, it's always helpful.
Talent is so demanding these days. All right, let's get into the episode, because today's episode, we're going to talk about a topic that is constantly being discussed, especially in testing. I feel like one of the things I used to always hear, or I hear at conferences, or I hear amongst our peers is like, oh, what framework are you using? Or what are you using to test? Are you using Cypress, Playwright, Selenium? What are you up to these days? What's the popular one these days? And it's always a different answer. I feel like everyone gives a different answer. Everyone has a different preference. Everyone has a favorite. Everyone has this community that they belong to. And so I thought it would be great to kind of talk to both of you, especially because I know Marcus, I guess we have to this is kind of like airing the cards, right? I think you have to say Marcus has been very involved in the Selenium project at the project leadership level for years. And I know that Nikolai kind of is a purveyor of all frameworks. Is that a fair? Yeah. And
that is fair. I am a non-biased user of all libraries.
Not non-biased user, but I feel like we can have a pretty non-biased conversation. Marcus is pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah. And I think that it's always important to understand. Like I'm not about to sit here and tell you one's better than the other without some kind of context or qualifier. Like there's absolutely reasons to use every framework, or the framework probably wouldn't exist. There are a couple that I think should die, but they're still being used by some people in successful ways. So, I mean, to me, the answer is going to be frustratingly it depends for a lot of these, but I can usually logic my way through the answer.
That it seems to be your go-to answer pretty much every time we talk about any topic. Marcus usually comes at us with the "it depends" answer. No, I'm just kidding, Marcus. I mean it's true. That's the thing.
Technology is tough. It's rarely black and white.
I'm glad you said that, because I've seen so many. One of my reasons for wanting to do this episode is there's been a lot of polls and surveys that I've seen. Nikolai, you did one through the Ultimate QA, actually. I just saw one Ministry of Testing was doing, which made me think of it again. And it's like, what's your favorite tool? Which one do you love the best? What's the best for use? Actually, the one I haven't seen yet, which I feel like we need to do, or someone needs to do, is like, what's your best tool for this application? Is perhaps the better question. But we're seeing these a lot lately, and you see them all the time, and it's because people have opinions about these tools, and we're also trying to gauge what's popular right now, which is why I think you did what you did, and why Ministry of Test, it's trying to keep a pulse on it because it's constantly changing. So maybe we could start not there, but I just wanted to throw it out and tell everybody why we're talking about it today. Let's start with what the heck is a testing framework, because I feel like we need to start at square one, and then we can get into the advanced algebra.
Yeah, sounds right.
So what is a test framework?
It depends.
I deserve that.
The way I define a framework, and I'd be curious to see if Nikolai has the same thing. Maybe we should go on mute. I'm kidding. We don't have to do that. Hot take, I don't consider Selenium to be a framework. Unfortunately, the industry seems to disagree with me on that, so I got to pick my battles and just sort of go along with it as a framework. But let me explain my reasoning. I think that a framework, it implies a test framework, meaning that it is a tool that helps you test something. Selenium does help you test something, but it's not arranged with any concept of, I am about to start a test, and at the end of this test, I'm going to send you a judgment around whether or not the test passes or fails or indicates anything about your quality. Selenium doesn't do any of that. All it does is execute commands that operate a browser, and that's it. You have to wrap it in a framework like JUnit or TestNG, which knows what a test is and knows what a verdict is and knows how to report and do all that stuff, which means when I'm asked what framework do I use, I never say Selenium. I say Java Selenium JUnit or Java Selenium TestNG, or in the case of a framework that I built myself, which used JUnit, it was called Scaffold. I used the Scaffold framework, which combines Java, JUnit, and Selenium, but with also some smart like page object models and stuff like that. So to me, Selenium is a tool that fits into a framework. And so that's kind of how I define a framework, and why I do think that Cypress is a framework, but not Selenium. So it gets into some real chop and broccoli, kind of like semantics. And I hate to be the person involved in semantics, but I mean, I've got a degree in linguistics and I've been doing this a long time. So I just feel like precision in language is important. So I try to, be pretty precise about that kind of stuff. Nikolai, do you generally agree, or what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you, Marcus. I mean, I think the term framework was around since automated testing started, and it was born probably around the earlier tools, right? Like IBM Rational Robot or Mercury Interactive that transitioned into QuickTest Pro, where you only had the tool. Also, I like to refer to the tool as a library to do automated testing, but you needed to build a lot of more tooling around it to do the reporting, to do the analytics, to do maybe some API interactions, to have page objects, orchestration, and so on. And so that's where I think the framework term started, it was a set of tools or libraries that were combined together into a framework. And so that's been propagated through the time, and then comes along Cypress and Playwright that have all of this baked in. So I totally agree with you. Correct, rightfully so. Those are called frameworks because you download them, they have everything baked in, you use it. Selenium, yeah, a library, a tool that needs stuff built around it. So yeah, Selenium, not a framework. I think of Selenium as the HTTP protocol of the web. You wouldn't use a bare HTTP protocol to interact with the web. You'd have some kind of library that you can interact with it. And so Selenium is that. It's the bare web requests that you make, and then you want a more user-friendly way to interact with it. And so that's where you add other tools.
Yeah. Selenium was built as a robotic browser control mechanism that happened to be used for testing. But at every step along the way, you had to have something like Mocha or Jasmine or, what's the PyPy or JUnit, TestNG in order to operate it.
Funny enough, I mean, at one point when I was transitioning from QTP to Selenium, I actually built my own test runners. So that was a pain in the ass. Nobody, I hope, is doing that anymore. But because it was common in QTP, I made that mistake with Selenium. And so it's just interesting that you said that you need to use these libraries. You don't have to. I guess you can build your own test runner, but it's unnecessary and overkill.
So yeah, it's a lot of work.
I asked ChatGPT because, of course, ChatGPT needs to weigh in as our fourth panelist here. I asked it to explain it like I'm a 10-year-old and to give me two different responses that I could choose which one is correct. So here's the first one. Imagine you have a big box of Lego blocks to build something. An automation testing framework is like the instructions that tell you how to build cool things with those blocks, but for computer programs. It helps people who test computer programs do their job faster and easier. They use the instructions to check if the program works right, like making sure all the Lego pieces fit where they're supposed to. This way, they don't have to check every single piece by hand, which saves a whole lot of time and makes sure they don't miss any pieces. That sound right?
I don't like that definition.
I'd give that a kind of a B minus.
A B minus.
Yeah. Are we ready for this? I would say, to me, a better analogy would have been it's the finished Lego product with interactable parts, however they work,
like modular, and swappable.
Yeah, how all of them came together and the ability to swap it out. That is a framework.
Interesting. Okay, well then the second one's way off. So the first one was a better response, at least. Well, there you go. You can't trust it for everything.
No,
we don't look at it in like Wikipedia even anymore to consult for this. We look at ChatGPT.
Yeah, I've been also like, I've been at Sauce Labs now for going on 5 years, and there's still confusion within our little testing company about what a framework is. I remember when I first started here, the CEO asked me, "Hey, why don't you support these other frameworks?" And what I thought he was asking me was, why don't I support the use of a framework like JUnit? Because he's basically saying, why don't you support using JUnit? I'm like, I absolutely do support it. What he was asking was, why don't I support using Cypress instead of Selenium? And I'm like, it's like the CEO of the company didn't know at that point what a framework was. Well, it's not that he didn't know what it was. He had his own definition, and we didn't agree on those definitions before we had the conversation. And so I confused the crap out of him because I'm supposed to be this expert, but I didn't know what he was talking about. So I didn't answer the question the way I wanted to. And once I finally understood the question, I was able to say, "Oh, well, I do support the use of Cypress. I think it's fine." Like I have some quibbles with it, but people are getting work done with it. I don't have a problem with that. We should support it.
So I guess let's kind of talk real quick about the benefits of an automated test framework. Like, ultimately, what are the main benefits? High level.
I think some of the benefits are you get a ready solution that works the same in whatever environment you use it, with whatever team you use it, right? Assuming similar configuration between the tools, and you get the same output. And so it's like it's like having a laptop, right? You have a laptop. The laptop has a keyboard. If you have a Mac laptop, it has a keyboard. It works in a certain way. You can interact with it. You pick up another MacBook. It's going to work exactly the same way. And so anyone can easily transition from MacBook to MacBook without having any issues, knowing exactly what's going to come out, where the files will be downloaded, how the browser works, and so on. And so those are the advantages of a framework. And of course, because a framework is based on code, maintenance is a very important factor to consider, because most of the costs related to software development come from maintenance, not new creation. And so having reusable components allows the maintenance costs to decrease. And so then you might get the idea that if you have a framework like a Cypress or a Playwright, now millions of people around the world can use it, and there's only one team that needs to maintain it and make sure that things work. Bugs are filed, they fix the bugs, new versions are released, and everyone can continue to use this framework. What do you think, Marcus?
Yeah, sounds good. I think there was a period where when I was transitioning from QTP to Selenium, I had a similar thing where I was sort of used to building all the scaffolding myself for how to make it usable. And then when my company that I work for made the decision to move to Java-based Selenium support, the day my developer showed me, hey, if you just add this import statement here and then do an @test method and then start writing Selenium code, like everything we've done to build this into our CI/CD system and everything we report on and all the greens and reds and the check marks and all the telemetry you get from the performance of the tests, and it just works because you're taking advantage of what people have already built, and you don't have to. So you're right. You could focus entirely on the content of what you need to be doing. That's all above the line, and it's important for your business, as opposed to writing the same code everyone else has just already used. Like, you don't want to do that below the line stuff. It's so yeah. And you're absolutely right, especially the call out around maintenance, because that is where automation people very, very much often misunderestimate how much of that work is going to be. And once they figure it out, at least you can get them set up for success by giving them a way that they can just focus on that maintenance and not have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah.
And I would probably throw out there that, as a user of all the tools, like, from Selenium to Playwright to Cypress to so many others, that's probably one of the reasons why people like tools like Cypress and Playwright, is because they have a lot of the stuff baked in. And so it makes their job easier. It makes it easier for them to focus on the testing, not have to worry about how do I generate videos and logs and how do I debug? Oh my God, Cypress makes debugging so much easier. So now it's made my job easier of testing. And so, of course, when your developer experience is improved like that and you can put in more effort into your actual valuable role, it helps those tools to be popular.
Yeah, and it's interesting also, the not to go too much on a tangent, but a little bit of a tangent is like design considerations when you're designing this kind of a tool. It's really interesting because Selenium, as a design goal, never had it in mind to do reporting or orchestration or any of that stuff. Like I said, it's a browser control mechanism, robotic browser control mechanism. It doesn't even, it doesn't have the ability to even judge whether or not something is correct. It just says, here's a command and I executed the command and here's the result of executing that command. And people ask us in the Selenium community all the time, ask the leadership, why don't you do this kind of reporting? Why don't you do API testing? Why don't you allow us to dig in on the browser and see what the HTTP status codes were from a request? And it's like, this tool is held together by the miracle of, a dozen open source volunteer contributors for the last 18 years. It's kind of a miracle it works as well as it does and continues to evolve and grow with the changing web. Us baking framework features into this would just be absurd. It goes against the design goals. The reason Cypress did it is because they're a for-profit company that's trying to do the next generation of testing tools that they're trying to sell to users. And they've done a very good job of building amazing features in. Someone should build those around Selenium, but Selenium as a design goal was never meant to do that stuff.
So we're starting to go down the next role, where we should be taking this conversation, because here's where the debates come in. Here's where the conversations come in about the tools themselves, and everybody loves to name themselves a tool. I don't know if we need to go into all of them. Maybe we could just talk about the major ones. We kind of already mentioned, the Cypress, the Playwrights, Selenium, if you want to call it. Maybe Marcus is going to yell at me if I include Selenium.
At this point, I think we've defined it well enough to at least. I don't mind for the rest of the conversation lumping it with Cypress.
Sure. Okay.
Just if you're hearing it, assume that Jason means Selenium plus your favorite language and some orchestration mechanism. Just assume that.
Well, there's more. I mean, we can go on to the whole list: Appium, WebDriver IO, Puppeteer. I mean, what is it?
Nightwatch,
BDD,
Test Cafe, Cucumber, SpecFlow,
Jest.
Yeah, we could. I don't know.
Keep going.
We could talk.
Just as a testing library, I would say.
Just a testing library. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
confusingly, sometimes people refer to a
lump it in with a
testing
framework.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. And there's so many, and you could go on, and it's like trying to remember them all, especially on the spot. So now we know the tools. We don't have to get too far into it. It's not about the tool necessarily for me that I want to ask this question about, but it's more like, how do you choose, knowing that there are all these tools out there, how do you choose the right automation test framework for your needs?
It depends.
Marcus, we're going to kick you out if you answer that way again.
I'm sorry. I think that and I would love to hear Nikolai's opinion, but we should try to sort of keep kind of quick answers and then trade back and forth. So I'll start with a quick answer. I think that the predominant programming language of the development team should play a major role in selecting your framework. That's my opinion, and that can be argued against, but that's sort of my experience tells me that that's the best way to get developers on board with helping out with testing. And I'm curious to hear other opinions.
I plus one that through my experience, I've found being able to do white box automated testing enables you to have so many more testing capabilities that you don't have when you do black box automated testing. So I agree with Marcus. I would also say the goal of your automation efforts should be considered when choosing a testing framework or a library. For example, are you going to only do end-to-end black box automated testing? Okay, that puts you in a certain space. If you're planning on having a deeper, more comprehensive strategy like doing API testing and mixing in some integration tests in there, visual, front-end performance. All right, so now you need to start thinking outside of the bounds of something like a Selenium. Selenium may be appropriate, but now you're starting to realize that, okay, Selenium will be only one tool in the toolbox, and the rest you're going to need to build all yourself. So is that okay? Or do you want to pick something up that has all of that already baked in?
Yeah. And I think going back to the point of language, it's interesting because Cypress does have a lot of capabilities like API testing and web testing. It has a lot of that stuff built into it, as well as really good debugging tools and good ergonomics. But if you're applying this to a team that is predominantly staffed with Java developers, it's probably too heavy a lift for them to want to adopt a framework like that. So you're going to want to adopt something like Playwright or Selenium Java that will have a fighting chance of the developers being able to read your code. Or if you're Android, you can write Selenium tests in Kotlin even and really accelerate your usage there of Appium or even Espresso. Because I think you could do either with Appium or you could write Kotlin with either Appium or Espresso. And each of those has its own reason for being a good choice for mobile, which we could talk about or not, because that's a little bit of a rabbit hole, but it's a similar set of considerations. Yeah.
I could make this statement pretty comfortably. I'd be curious what Marcus thinks. If you're working on a web application written in JavaScript or TypeScript using one of the modern front-end frameworks, React, Next, Angular, it's pretty likely that the best decision for you to do is pick either Playwright or Cypress, because it will enable you to do testing for that web application in the best way possible. You'll have the capability to do component testing, unit testing, and all types of testing with one tool versus trying to figure out how to do it on your own with another tool. I can make that statement comfortably and not see too much counter evidence to that. What do you think, Marcus?
I don't think I would see counter evidence. I would have some considerations and some kind of, I don't know, I'd say maybe warnings, it depends on where you come from a little bit, because Cypress has some design limitations that are right there on the front page. Cypress, for example, cannot open a new tab in a browser. Cannot. Which means when I was at a customer site and they were actually considering expending like millions of dollars rewriting a whole suite of tests from Selenium into Cypress, and I pointed this out to them, they were like, oh, our entire product depends on launching a new tab when you go to the cart checkout flow. Like instantly, it's out the door. So move to Playwright instead.
Yep, exactly.
Cypress also has some limitations around how it tests Safari, in that it's not fully compatible. It tests kind of, the only phrase I can come up with is a bastardized version of Safari. It doesn't use full Safari. And 75% of the time, that's fine. But if you find yourself really needing, according to Hoyle, Safari support, Cypress is probably not going to be able to overcome that in the future. The other consideration I would build in, and where I would actually throw a third option in there, which is WebDriver IO, is that Playwright and Cypress don't actually follow W3C standards for WebDriver, and WebDriver IO does. So if that kind of compatibility and universal sort of spec matters to you, then I would throw WebDriver IO in there for compatibility. Now, the thing that you lose choosing WebDriver IO over Playwright Cypress is that Playwright and Cypress run super, super, super fast because they're executing within the same application loop as the browser itself, whereas WebDriver IO still follows the sort of client-server API protocol, and it has those hops every time you run a command. So if that consideration is not a big deal, or if you want to use something like Sauce Orchestrate to shorten the distance between the client and the server, then I would argue that WebDriver IO is a good choice, because it also then allows you to use a wrapping framework like Mocha. If your team is already using something like that, it allows you to embed really nicely within that. Although Playwright does that too. So 3 different frameworks, 3 different sort of reasons for being. And I think that they're all good choices depending on your context.
Yeah. And one
really
other
long
thing
monologue.
No, that was great.
No, that was great, because Nikolai basically came at it from, this is the only way, like this is a very, I'm sure of this, but
comfortable. Yeah.
Comfortable.
Not sure, but like, yeah, it's
but comfortable. Yeah, confident statement, which I think perhaps many have, but then Marcus was able to come up with the counter. And this is happening constantly, right? That's what, it's so polarizing which framework.
Yeah, and that's why I don't want to argue better or worse. It's going to be so much about your like, I would choose Cypress in a heartbeat if I really didn't have to worry about Safari compatibility or opening new tabs. If I didn't have to worry about either of those things, that Cypress is a beautiful tool. I hate to give up some of that stuff. I wish someone would build that stuff to be just as good around Selenium. But you've got to consider that, or you're going to go down the road, spend a lot of money, and then figure out, oh, I need to open tabs.
The other thing I was going to add about WebDriver IO is it enables mobile automated testing, which neither Cypress nor Playwright do. So if that's an important consideration for you in the future, WebDriver has that capability. But one thing I never understood, Marcus, and maybe you understand it better than me, I understand the fact that like WebDriver IO supports W3C, which is the web standards for automated testing, but I don't understand the practical impact of that. Like, what does that mean to me as a developer writing test code?
In very broad terms, it means that there's a chance, and then that's the thing, is this is about risk management. There is a chance that in the future, either a web standard can change that Cypress refuses or is unable to accommodate, or at some point, as was actually a threat with Firefox 10 years ago, before we got the standard ratified and everything, there was actually some discussion from Firefox about them putting out their own protocol and shutting down Selenium as possibility. And there's kind of nothing preventing browser makers from making that decision in the future. So if you're in a highly, highly, highly regulated industry and someone figures out that there's a web standard and the testing team is not following it because they chose this tool instead of this tool, there's a chance you could get boxed out. Now, is that real likely? I don't know. The practical reality of this is I'm going to cover my bets because I think that the WebDriver IO ecosystem is good enough for me not to have to, and not to want to deal with that risk. But I'm not going to tell someone that they shouldn't make that decision for their own business. It's just, I think that a lot of people don't understand that is even a risk for when they make the decision. And I think that maybe their management, their CISO would be very interested in knowing that they hadn't made that decision with the full information at their grasp. So like I said, it might be complete FUD, but I worry about it, you know?
Yeah, I didn't understand that risk until you just explained. If I have like a matrix of evaluation criteria for picking between the three different tools, W3C standards was not on that matrix of who gets the points for that, but it's an important point.
Question.
Go
what
ahead.
is on your matrix?
Yeah,
what's
question.
on that matrix for evaluation?
So,
do you mind sharing that?
No, I don't mind. Are you asking for me to pull it up and show it, or want me to just talk about it?
No, I guess high level. Like, what are the main things that you're looking for?
I think you can group the evaluation criteria to like several major components. There will be like the developer experience, which is like, what does the API look like for the automated testing library? What's the debugging experience like? Are there videos and recordings and screenshots automatically generated? Then you can do, how well does it work with CI? For example, is there a nice command line interface that makes it easy to run CI and different flags that you can pass in to make it work well? Then another category you could have is browser support, as we talked about here, right? Like how well does it support all the browsers out there? So like Cypress would lose some points for not doing well with Safari, for example. Does it support mobile? Another criteria to think about is the types of testing that you want to do with the library. So do you want to do functional browser testing? Okay. How about API testing, component testing, front-end performance testing, security, accessibility, and so on and so forth. So you can capture each one of those points and weigh each of the tools and how well it does that in terms of meeting your goals. What else, Marcus? Any thoughts?
My biggest would be CI compatibility, CI/CD compatibility. My second biggest would be reporting. I want to know that if I plug this tool into, if I'm using TeamCity or Jenkins or Bamboo or Travis or Circle CI, anything, if I'm using this framework, I don't want to lift a finger to have it execute exactly what I want to execute and when. And I don't want to lift a finger to have to understand what happened during the test run. So to me, those are the most important criteria for like, I can imagine a team just sort of saying, nope, on half a dozen frameworks, if it doesn't have these things. Like, that might even be a consideration before programming language supported. The thing about Playwright, Cypress, Puppeteer, Test Cafe, WebDriver IO is that they really do favor the JavaScript world. And we still have a whole bunch of customers, and I meet a whole bunch of teams who still have to live in Java. And I mean, I'm a Java guy, so I don't apologize for it. I think it's great, but a lot of people still have to deal with that. So we have to make sure that it still works for that world.
And Python too, right?
Yeah, Python's growing faster than I think all of them.
And all of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. But it hasn't eclipsed yet, and certainly not in our uses. Our usage is very heavily dominated by Java.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like the title of this episode should be "What's your favorite framework?" or what test frameworks and how to use them. It depends. Like, it depends is the answer is the answer to all of this, because there's just so much criteria. There's so many variables. There's so many things that you have to take into account before you select a tool. It's a framework. It's really interesting. Thank you for educating me. I thought I knew more about frameworks than I did until you all started talking.
It's a complicated subject. Yeah.
I have a real life example of how important it is to evaluate the criteria of the tool that you're going to choose. I was working with a customer to help them choose an automated testing library for their needs, to meet their testing needs. And Cypress was under consideration, Playwright, along with other tools. With Cypress, we were trying to test a Salesforce-based application, which has a lot of domain redirects, which Cypress does not do well. And so what we found out was Cypress struggled with the functional browser testing because of the redirects. You could have bypassed it, but it would have taken some workarounds and it would have made the code messy and complicated. And so, if you're trying to pick which tool is the favorite and has the most NPM downloads, you would have started using Cypress and you would have hit this roadblock very quickly, and it would have made your testing a nightmare, if not impossible. And so you would have had to shift to Playwright or WebDriver.io. We were using TypeScript in this case, so to WebDriver.io or Playwright or even something else. But again, just that one little limitation totally eliminates Cypress out of the picture. Now you got to go towards another set of tools.
Thank you so much for sharing with us, Nikolai and Marcus. Really appreciate it as always. And thank you for listening to another episode. We'll probably have to do a follow-up on test frameworks because I would love to do a follow-up about the direction of the frameworks and where they're headed, especially the more prevalent and important mobile testing has become. And just so much to kind of get into there, and it would fit a whole other episode. So probably look for that in the future for sure. And we really appreciate you taking time to listen to another episode of Test Case Scenario. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.